My name is Anthony, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of TCO Labs, Inc. Our 26 student members have been working tirelessly over the past 6 to 12 months to set this all up for you today. So we're really excited that you've all decided to join us today. Before we begin, I want to share a bit more about our organization. TCO Labs, Inc. is a 501c3 student-run nonprofit organization on a mission to foster entrepreneurship at the Johns Hopkins Homewood campus. Together with an 8-person board of directors comprised of alumni and other entrepreneurs, a 7-person student executive board, and a 26-student chapter, we work with school departments, other organizations in Baltimore to strengthen the entrepreneurial community here at Homewood campus. We do this in 3 ways: community building, programming, and resources. TCO Labs hosts 3 events per year. Our fall kickoff is used to introduce students to the entrepreneurial opportunities here at Hopkins. A speaker symposium in the winter is our living room style speaker series for students. And today, Hatch is our flagship event. On the community side, we're working with the university administration to open an entrepreneurship space here on campus. And we're proud to say that the space, named Fast Forward U, is opening up in Wyman Park Building on April 17th. Baltimore is also a huge focus for us. We work closely with many partners in the Baltimore area in order to bridge the current gap that exists between Hopkins and the rest of the greater Baltimore community. Lastly, TCO's Labs is for students by students, and we are extremely proud of that fact. We are here to serve as a resource for all of the Hopkins community. So whether you're running a startup or you came up with an idea yesterday in the shower, we want to serve as your first step as you take your journey in entrepreneurship here at Hopkins. Today's conference is a major step in that direction. Hatch got its name because we're all Blue Jays and because of the fun terminology for growth that startups have. It just so happened that it fell on Easter weekend, so you see all the eggs and all the decorations. But symbolically, Hatch also represents the beginning. Our beginning and the beginning of a stronger entrepreneurship community here at Homewood. So without further ado, I want to welcome Lyle Paskowitz to the stage to introduce our first speaker. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Hey guys, welcome to Hatch. I'm going to be introducing our first speaker, Dave Troy. Dave Troy is a serial entrepreneur and activist based in Baltimore. He is a graduate of the Johns Hopkins University Department of Computer Science and became involved in entrepreneurship when he started his first company as a teenager. Today, he will be discussing aspects of his entrepreneurial journey and why getting involved in entrepreneurship at a young age is critically important. Please welcome Dave Troy.
Okay, so I want to thank Lyle and the rest of the gang here for putting this together and for inviting me to be here with you today. First, just a little disclaimer. I just got in from Europe last night, and so I'm a little bit jet lagged right now. So it's about 6 hours later where my brain is. So just it's going to be sort of an interesting pace, but it should be okay. So. One of the things that I think you'll find when you attend conferences on business and entrepreneurship is that there's kind of a persistent focus on what I would call survivorship bias. They tend to put people on stage and, who have been very successful, you'll be hearing their stories and whatnot, and you kind of realize that, in fact, these people were not only very successful and made some interesting, probably some very good choices, but they're also very lucky. And, I think it's a little bit of a disservice to kind of portray entrepreneurship as something that is always going to lead to like wild success or whatever. I think it's much more of a process and a way of thinking. And what I hope to convey to you today is some sense of what an entrepreneurial journey looks like, in my own case and maybe some of the other ones that I've touched, and kind of how it's more of a thought process. This isn't about being, sort of figuring out how to be ultimately wildly successful. It's about how to approach the world, right? And I can say this with some confidence because I'm only moderately successful. So therefore, you can take what I say seriously. This is not all just luck talking, okay? So just a little bit of background. I started my first company, actually, the first entrepreneurial endeavor that I had was when I was about 5 years old. My family had just moved to Maryland from California. My parents had given me a big stack of papers to play with and said, you can do whatever you want with these. So I started to make paper airplanes and sell them around the neighborhood, selling them out of a trash bag and selling the small ones for 5 cents, bigger, medium ones for 10 cents, and the larger ones for 25 cents. And one of the neighbors called up and said, to my parents, hey, listen, are you aware that your son is out selling your mortgage papers? And, it was like they had all this complicated stuff going on with their mortgage and escrow, and they had given me these extra, papers and whatnot to play with, figuring I would draw on them or something. They didn't know that I would be taking them out and selling them around the neighborhood. So, this mindset kind of thing tends to start pretty young. And by the time I was 13, 14, I had my own software company and had done a bunch of things involving computer BBSs and things like that, which was kind of the precursor to the internet. But by the time I was 14, I had a company selling computer hardware and software located here in Severna Park, Maryland, so just 25 miles away or so from here. By the time I was 16 and a junior in high school, I had my own storefront and was selling things and was shipping things all around the world. And by the time I graduated from high school, myself and a partner, we had an annual business of about $1 million a year of hardware and software. So then you're faced with this kind of choice of like, well, what do I do? Do I do my own business stuff, or do I go to college or whatever? And of course, being 18 and endlessly optimistic, I said, well, I can do both, of course. So I went to Johns Hopkins and ran my business while I was attending Johns Hopkins. And, that turned out to be very, very difficult to do, as many of you can probably imagine. The course load here is intense, as you well know, and especially, being a freshman, sophomore, studying things. You mentioned that I graduated from the computer science department. I actually did not graduate from the computer science department, and I'll tell you the whole story about how that happened. But I did take a lot of comp sci classes and learned a lot that would prove to be foundational for a lot of the things that I've done later on. But, I actually kind of skipped around between several different things. I was, for a little while, majoring in behavioral biology and cognitive science, comp sci, and ultimately liberal arts. But for me, it was really a question of like, how do I balance this kind of entrepreneurial journey with school? So after, I think, a year and a half or so, I decided to take some time off of school, focus on business, getting that ramped up. So I started, ramping up that business and developing more distribution, and was importing and exporting things to Europe and Asia and whatnot. And of course, this was still very much the time when being involved with technology was kind of all about selling and, sort of developing physical products that you were shipping. So whether it was like shipping software packages or, computer hardware or whatever, we had not yet entered into the age of the internet. So around 1994, the internet started to become kind of accessible as a, commercializable technology. So I was immediately on that and developed our own software for doing sales online of computer hardware and software. So as part of that, we developed our own hosting capacity and things like that. And so, we were able to start actually selling internet access in late 94, early 95. And that, of course, was, very early days for the internet. And we built that business up, ultimately got out of the business of selling computers and software and stuff, and focused solely on internet access and web hosting and things like that. And around 1997, I co-founded a small telephone company with some people in order to take advantage of economics associated with the Telecom Act of 1996. I got married in 1992. I graduated from Hopkins in 1996. That took 7 years because I started in 89 and graduated in 96. And as I mentioned, I ultimately graduated with a liberal arts degree. Now, if you've heard Steve Jobs talk about, what has led to Apple's successes over the years, he's often said, and, before his death, that it was really about being at the intersection of technology and liberal arts. And I really believe that. And I think that one of the things that's incumbent on us as we start to educate, further generations and get people really wrapped around the challenges that are coming our way, which are significant, is to get people focused on how do we integrate really the great lessons of liberal arts, which include architecture and art and literature and what it means to be human and philosophy, and particularly ethics. Ethics are a key thing that we're missing right now, especially as we start to apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to this world around us. How do we do that ethically? And I would argue that most of the technology leaders that are in the space today have zero to very little foundation in ethics as they do these things. And we've seen that come out in the struggles around fake news and all the things going on politically with Facebook and things like that. So a piece of advice might be to focus some on ethics as you kind of pursue also understanding technology more deeply. So as a result of building up that business that I had in the late 90s and up through like 2004, I basically built that up into a pretty successful company. I was the only stockholder, my wife and I did not raise any money around that business, and we sold it in an all-cash deal in 2004. Now, not a huge thing, but big enough to be very meaningful to me personally, which then has allowed me to go on to explore some other things. So in 2005 and 2006, I worked in Europe and in South America on developing voice-over IP technologies. Got to spend a lot of time in Rio de Janeiro. That was cool. And then also doing some work in Europe. But ultimately, I kind of realized that, I was not really all that into telephony, because I really hate talking to people on the phone. And it kind of dawned on me, why am I working on building all this telephone stuff when I knew a lot about it, but I didn't really like doing it. So I decided to start looking at some other projects. And so in 2007, I did a project just as kind of a weekend interesting little hack project that was actually the first project to use the Twitter API. So basically, it was a real-time visualization of all of the traffic on Twitter. And that project went crazy viral, got all kinds of press coverage, led to a couple of other follow-on projects, and ultimately ended up in the Museum of Modern Art in New York for an exhibition there in 2008. And that kind of surprised me, because it made me realize that, like, if you follow something that's just sort of personally interesting, scratching an itch, and with the power of the internet, you have this opportunity to reach everybody, right? And if you get the timing right and you get the kind of vibe of it right, that can become really, really a significant force. So that, in turn, put me in touch with the founders of Twitter, as well as a variety of other entrepreneurs, people like Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack, and a variety of people kind of from that generation who I've now gone on to be part of my network. And as a result, has led me into some other opportunities, like with 500 Startups. So I'm a small investor in 500 Startups. I just spent, right before I was in Europe, I spent 3 weeks in Africa with 500 Startups on a program called Geeks on a Plane, where we went to Nigeria, to Ghana, and to South Africa, talking to the entrepreneurial communities in each of those countries and studying what's happening there. And then also, as part of that, I got connected into TED and the TEDx community. So I started TEDx Mid-Atlantic in Washington, D.C., which has in turn connected me to a whole ton of other resources. And then in 2014, I did a TED Talk on mapping social networks, which I basically was one of the first people to start to look at large-scale understanding of social networks for understanding cities better and that sort of thing. So talk a little bit more about that. But basically, getting involved with that, it led me to other opportunities, working with MIT on some projects in India, and ultimately, just this last week, I'm advising a company called Leaders, which is sort of based in San Francisco, but it's started by a guy from France, and he was doing a conference in Paris. His object is to try to find the next emerging leaders around the world. He kind of describes it as a combination of product hunt for people, combined with the top 1% of LinkedIn. So what I would just sort of describe there is that that's sort of a story arc, right? There's sort of a progression of like one thing to the next. And I don't really know where it's going, and I don't necessarily have any specific goal in mind as I'm kind of pursuing these opportunities. But each new connection, each new phase kind of leads to more connections and bigger questions and more opportunities. So I have a company right now called 410 Labs. We make products that help people process email, but basically the point of the company was to just try product ideas and see what works, and the ones that work we keep, right? So we have a product called Maelstrom for the web, Mailstrom, that helps people process email more efficiently, and that's a paid subscription product. And then we have a product for iOS called Chuck that you can download right now that is free and lets you process email much, much more efficiently than anything else out there. So in addition to that, as if there's time to do more, but I don't watch a lot of TV, so I can fit a few more things in. I'm doing some activism here in Baltimore. So one of the things that I noticed was going on in the 2008-2009 timeframe was that there was a lot of activity around entrepreneurship and startups and stuff in other cities that I was seeing, but not necessarily that much happening here in Baltimore. So I started to work more concertedly on that along with several other people, and started the first co-working space in Baltimore back in 2009. And you know, if you've noticed, there's now a lot of co-working spaces, not only here in Baltimore, but around the world, and it's become kind of a thing. But you know, it was sort of a beginning to that, and I got plugged in with the people who were doing that and learned how to do it and got that set up early. And that in turn led to the formation of startups and things like that. And then I also started the Baltimore Angels Investment Group back in 2009, along with Greg Cangialosi here in town. And that has now, you know, done very, very well and has, I think, 50-some members and has invested in dozens of companies and has really helped to become a sort of cornerstone of the Baltimore startup and investment scene. And I've invested in some other companies myself along the way as well. And, you know, again, it's this idea of kind of things moving forward. You know, there's always kind of a new opportunity and a new thing to get involved in, and you'll kind of see where it you know, ends up when you get there. But I wanted to kind of come back to a few key points along the way and maybe offer some specific ideas about how to think about an entrepreneurial journey and the one that you're going to create for yourselves. First is starting young is really, really awesome. And the reason for that is because your costs are subsidized by your family, right? You know, being able to at least sometimes live at home and not have a whole lot of other expenses going on is great. And, you know, I was speaking at a high school actually in Latvia a few weeks ago. And, you know, the thing I was telling them, even at that age, you know, it's amazing to be able to get started with something because you really just don't have any expenses. So by the time you get to college and whatnot, yeah, your expenses start to go up a little bit, but, you know, you don't have necessarily like a mortgage, you don't have, you know, car payments, you don't have kids to deal with, you don't have all these other things that, you know, potentially are going to be just continuous drags on you. And I think one of the things that I've noticed here in this market in terms of entrepreneurship is that if you get a good degree like in computer science or something like that, and then you get a security clearance, you can get a job, you know, making 150K, you know, here locally with NSA or some contractor that works for them. And that's great. But then you start to get kind of addicted to the cash flow, right? And, you know, you start to buy things and you start to have, you know, a wife and kids or whatever, and it just starts to get to be something you can't walk away from, right? So I think being able to kind of just go into entrepreneurship and not worry so much about the downside, because everybody talks about the risk or whatever. I don't think the risk is that high, but don't make extra risk for yourself, right? If you can avoid it, like try to keep the risk down to a dull roar. So anyway, starting young is a really, really great thing to do, because you're also very, you know, you're kind of like stem cells, you know, you're very plastic. You can kind of like reform yourselves into a lot of different shapes and sizes and plug into things. And, you know, so you're very malleable at that age and able to kind of try different things and not worry so much about the consequences. I think when people get into their later 20s and 30s and 40s, it becomes much more difficult to say, I was doing this, but now I'm going to jump away and do this. It's just psychologically very difficult. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to kind of point out is an insight that I gained from the work of a woman named Sarah Sarasvati, who is a researcher around the topic of entrepreneurship. And there's a paper that I would recommend that you look up of hers. It's called What Makes Entrepreneurs Entrepreneurial? And in that paper, she outlines basically two modes of thinking, two different ways of kind of seeing the world. The first is what she describes as effectual logic, and she believes that this is the mode of thinking that entrepreneurs employ when they kind of perceive the world and how to create change in the world. And in effectual logic, what she argues is that people start with kind of what they have and what they know. So you might know a few people, you might have a really good subject matter expertise in a particular area, you might have a patent, you might have a physical location where you can try something, you might have a pile of mortgage papers that you can turn into paper airplanes, whatever it might be. And you start with that, and you sort of create something, you add value to that, and then you put that out in the world, and you see kind of if the world responds to it. If the world responds to it in a positive way, you'll probably generate some profits, which can then be used to put back in, and you might make some new contacts, which can then be folded back in, and you can kind of keep iterating on that until eventually you've kind of built up enough stuff to kind of be able to do something really pretty special, because you now have all of these contacts and capital and things that have been added to the mix. But what she argues is that at each stage of that process, you're placing bets, but they're very specifically structured kind of bets. So you're basically creating bets that have sort of unlimited or unknown upsides and very small or capped downsides. So never make a huge bet that's going to totally, blow you up unless you're just so sure about it and you're willing to kind of go there. But almost all the bets that entrepreneurs make are small, controlled bets where the upside is greater than the downside. And if you think about how markets work and how the world kind of is structured, it's a huge market. If you do something really good, your upside is going to be very significant. So I think that's sort of one interesting thing to keep in mind about this idea of effectual logic. The other piece of it is that it means that entrepreneurs, in general, tend to be much better at starting things and kind of like innovating and moving things forward than they are at running things. And so we often think about the idea of like a great CEO. Well, a great CEO is actually an amalgam of two different really distinct skill sets. The first being this effectual logic, sometimes to be able to bring something to fruition. But then there's also what Sarasvati describes as causal logic. And this is the kind of logic that an executive might employ when you're trying to get market share from one company to another. So like if you're the CEO of Coke, you're going to employ a really good ad campaign that's going to get you a % market share away from Pepsi, right? And that's a totally different kind of thinking than what most entrepreneurs actually do. And I think that's one of the reasons why many CEOs, many founding CEOs are really bad operators. So I think one of the things that you should be thinking about as you get on your entrepreneurial journey is what kind of business person are you really, yourself best suited to be? Are you more of an entrepreneur and an effectual thinking kind of person? Are you kind of good at thinking on your feet and maybe BSing a little and going along? Or are you the kind of person that's going to be able to inspire the confidence of a board of directors and maybe shareholders in order to get a market share away from Pepsi? And not that there's anything wrong with those two things, but they're very different. And if you look at even some of the most experienced business leaders and entrepreneurs, they have not necessarily had the easiest time moving between those modes. And I would argue that Steve Jobs is a very good example of somebody who had to kind of go spend some time in the desert in order to figure out how to move between those two modes of being. And there are other examples that you could look at too, but it's another thing to think about. On the topic of raising money, I've both raised money and not raised money for stuff. And I think one of the things that's not great about our current entrepreneurship culture is that there has become kind of a orthodoxy to how you're supposed to do things, right? It's sort of like, well, I'm getting my seed round and I'm, getting angel investors, and then I'm going to be looking to do a Series A, and then I'm going to do a Series B, and this is how it's going to be. Bottom line is that the world really seldom actually works that way. And in fact, I think it's a little bit of a disservice to assume that there's like one pathway. I think, there's an awful lot that you can do with bootstrapping, and the great thing about bootstrapping is that you're the only shareholder, and, you don't have to listen to what anybody else thinks. And at the end of the day, also, raising money is its own full-time job. It requires focus on that task alone. It requires going out and talking to a lot of people, a lot of bullshitting sometimes, and, it is it's almost antagonistic to whatever business task you're actually trying to perform. Because it doesn't actually get you closer to customers. It doesn't actually get you closer to truth about the product. So I would say approach that with some skepticism, but still, there's nothing wrong at all with raising money if it's the right thing to do. So from this, I would argue that this idea of like effectual logic, the entrepreneurial mindset, is very much a way of kind of perceiving the world. That it's a problem-solving technique. So some people, when they see a problem, they think, oh, well, I'm going to go talk to the government, or I'm going to, see if I can get somebody else to solve it. An entrepreneur thinks, I'm going to solve it. Here's what I'm going to do. This is an interesting problem, and these are the things that I can bring to bear. What do you know? How can you help me bring this to fruition? And then you kind of move it forward. So, I would say that a mark of a really good entrepreneur is somebody who kind of continuously sees the world as something that they can actually help to untangle and solve. And I would argue that it's worth kind of exploring how do you sort of sharpen your own skills for your capacity to do that. And another interesting insight around sort of entrepreneurial thinking is to listen to some of the stuff that Elon Musk has said. And I, again, hesitate sometimes to point to the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks of the world who have been super successful and are obviously exceptional. But I do think that his one insight around sort of product development is really key, which is to think about things in terms of first principles. And by first principles, I mean reducing stuff to like the laws of physics, right? So when he looked at, travel, he saw, that there was an opportunity to create a, evacuated tube with a vehicle with a fan on the front and accelerate it to 700 miles an hour and run it across the landscape. That's Hyperloop, right? And when he looked at SpaceX, he said, well, clearly we could, if we had a good enough computer control and the right rocket mechanisms and whatnot, we could build rockets that are reusable and could land and things like that. And he's really good at just kind of blocking out all the other thinking and all the other competitors and all the other noise that surrounds a problem and reducing it to the physics problem that underlies it. And I think that's a place that, particularly Hopkins is potentially really well suited to address, is that because, there is such an emphasis here on, science and math and first principles of physics, that's something that you can really dig into. So I think that's a great way to derive new ideas for products, and it's something that, you all can pursue. So, I don't want to take too much time here. A couple more minutes, or like 1 or 2 more minutes? Okay, cool. So, at any rate, giving you a little bit of an outline, I think, of some ideas that you can apply to thinking about the world entrepreneurially. I think an overarching theme that I think is really worth kind of focusing on is to focus on working on things that actually matter to people, as opposed to things where you think you can make money. Because in the end, life is short, and it's probably worth focusing on the things that can actually make a real difference. And in my own case, I've become more involved with Baltimore politics and activism here, trying to make a difference with that. And in really simple ways. I've got a Facebook group called Baltimore City Voters that I hope if any of you are voting in Baltimore City, please join. It's a great conversation on civics and whatnot. But things like that can actually kind of start to slowly. And they're not always going to happen overnight. It's not always going to be flashy. I don't have an exit strategy with Baltimore City Voters, but it's the right thing to do, And I think that there are dozens of things in the world where, it's kind of the right thing to do, and I think that those also lead to opportunities that can have entrepreneurial outcomes. So remember that, the money is a side effect of creating value in the world, and your primary goal as an entrepreneur is to actually create real value in the world and to work on things that matter. So, play that bigger game. We don't really have much time, and, contribute your skills, which I know are considerable, to problems that are really worthy of your time. Thank you.
Good to see you. The fundamental strength of a business lies in its ability to tackle problems nobody else has thought about. Carmen Daniel Jones was forced to think of a solution when, while in university, she befell an unfortunate accident. For some reason, this student, with fantastic grades and extracurriculars, who had all her ducks in a row, more so than the average person, was unable to get a job. She eventually studied the significant scale of the disability market and is currently the CEO of marketing, of the Solutions Marketing Group, a marketing consulting firm that targets the disabled and attempts to level their playing field. What I find truly remarkable about this is the amount of grit and resilience that she had to exhibit to not only cope with the misfortunes that befell her, but to rise above them by tackling them head on. The tremendous effort and absolute brilliance of this accomplishment just baffles the mind. Ladies and gentlemen, Carmen Daniel Jones.
Who is he talking about? Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. I am delighted to be with you all today, and as I drove up and I saw these bright faces that were smiling at me, I thought, gosh, our future is really, really bright. So I commend you all because I shared with my colleagues, when I was a sophomore in college, I wasn't thinking entrepreneurially. I was thinking about getting to the party, making sure I had what I needed, but I know you all have that mixed and interspersed in your activities, but I commend you. So my journey to entrepreneurship was unconventional, as was shared with you. And it really probably started when I was a young girl, and what I'm going to share with you will predate you all, many of your birth. So I started my first market research project in the 70s when how many of you have heard of the Partridge Family? Okay, a few, okay. So that was a music group, and then the Jackson 5, how many? Yeah. Okay, all right, so we got that. So I wanted to go around my neighborhood and find out which group did my neighbors prefer, the Jackson 5 or the Partridge Family. And I went and knocked on doors, which when I look back, that was so entrepreneurial of me because I was about 10 years old. But after that time, I really didn't have this vision of being a business owner. And then, as was shared with you, when I was a junior in college at Hampton University, I was involved in a car accident that changed my life irreparably. I was in the hospital for 6 months. I returned to school less than a year after the accident, and I had to learn everything new. I mean, I had to learn how to do things like get up and down stairs. They made you practice, in case there was an emergency, getting downstairs in your chair. I had to learn how to drive. I had to learn how to get dressed even, how to take care of personal needs, how to shop, all of those things that go with taking a 5'10" body and having it seated. I remember being at the hospital, and after my surgery, I asked my physician, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you rate, with 10 being the highest, of my chance of walking again? And he said, I would say about a 1. And I was really devastated because this became a very overwhelming thing in terms of what would life look like. When I returned back to college, my friends helped me regain my footing as a co-ed, and my brother was also a freshman, an incoming freshman at Hampton. And so that helped a lot with just adjusting back to life. And I, just resumed, and my friends adjusted, and we just figured out how to make it all work. Again, my disability just became a part of my life. And I was uncertain about what employment would look like for me, because this was in the 80s. This was in 1986-87, which predated the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And when I was trying to find work my senior year, my college didn't really have I was the only undergraduate student that was visibly disabled on campus, and my college didn't prep me for what going to work looked like. And so I went to interviews, and I had people ask me a lot of inappropriate questions like, what's your, they'd scour through my resume, and you all know those good resume, the interview type questions, and they would say, well, what's your chance of walking again? I think they wanted to know if this was temporary or permanent. Or they would say, can you move your feet? What's your prognosis? Can you move your feet? And I was like, now I know I would own those companies, but I didn't know then, because my goal was to make them comfortable with me. So there was an article written about me in a local paper, and someone read it who ran a nonprofit. This was a big shift in my career path. And, when I graduated, I didn't have a job. And my parents were loving, sweet folks, but like many of your parents are saying, you're going to get a job. And so I ended up being hired by a nonprofit organization, and I was counseling people with disabilities. And this was less than 2 years after my accident. So I didn't really embrace being a part of this group, but I needed a job, to be honest. And I made a whopping, this is scary, $16,000 a year. And counseled people to help them achieve their independent living goals. The beautiful thing about what happened is, as I counseled them, I was also counseling myself. I was also able to see what was possible. So I was there for a couple years, and I knew that I would not be a long-term employee because I just decided I needed more. I ended up moving to the Washington, D.C. area, and I accepted a job in the federal government, and I worked in a variety of agencies. But I still had, I still maintained, my major was marketing. I had this marketing itch. So I left to join a private sector company called Evan Kemp Associates, which was in Capitol Heights, Maryland. And Evan Kemp, for those of you who want to Google, was a commissioner at the EEOC. He was a wheelchair user. He was a Bush appointee, and he was one of the advocates that really was a proponent for the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I went to work at EKA and rose to become the vice president of marketing there, which was exciting because Mr. Kemp always said to us that people with disabilities, at that time there were about 46 million, people with disabilities will be a factor to corporations once people understand the money that they have to spend. And it was with that seed that he, shared with me. He said, every other group, African Americans, women, companies pay attention to their consumer purchasing power, but not people with disabilities. And so one day I was returning to the office, and I took what he shared with me and I made it personal. And I said, as a woman and as a person of color, companies target me, but not as an individual with a disability. And it was with that insight and noticing that gap that I started my company. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I do and the massive size of the disability market. Just by a show of, or someone could call out to me, how many people do you think in this country have a disability? Anybody? Go ahead. 60 million, okay. Good guess. Anybody else? 45%. So it's 56 million people in the United States with over $1 billion in discretionary spending. 1 in 5 people, and if I even said, how many of you in this room have a loved one with a disability or a friend? By show of hands, let me see. Okay. So that's about a third. A third of the families in this country report having a family member with a disability. And when you look at, there's been this shift with focus on autism and the prevalence and how small the numbers are now. 1 in 68 children are born with autism. So if you have a market this size and scope, it leaves this gap if companies are not targeting them, not only for as consumers, but also as prospective employees, because the unemployment rate of people with disabilities is double that of the general public. It takes a person who has a disability, and I'm sharing this with you all, so when you're in decision-making positions, which won't be too long, you can have an open mind as you see slates of candidates and you challenge people in your organization and say, you know what? We need to make sure that we have people with all differing, not just race, gender, and ethnicity, but also to include and integrate people with disabilities into your pool of candidates. So I started this company when I recognized the void. I started, honestly, very naively. I was not as, my process for how I started the company wasn't as sophisticated as the presenter before me. But I knew there was a need. So I recognized that need. And I knew that if companies had to comply with the ADA and with the Rehab Act, that why don't we leverage that opportunity and create some bottom line results. So my very first client was American Express. And let me tell you, if you're going to have a first client, that is a good client to have. and it lent itself credibility for me. A lot of clients came after that. So AOL was a client. Darden Restaurants, which is the parent company for Red Lobster and Bahama Breeze and Capital Grille, that they became a client. And it was really exciting. You know, the business was really starting to flourish and take off. Around that time, I also, in intervening time, I got married. I was pregnant, had a child. And when my child was born, this was a little bit of a change in my plan and path. My child was born with significant disabilities, unrelated to mine, but he was born with significant disabilities related to his respiratory system and breathing. And Marcus spent a year in the NICU. Now, you can imagine I was a bit overwhelmed and a little bit discouraged because I thought, you know what, I've punched this adversity ticket already. But what I saw in this whole process is that my parenting him gave me the ability to serve my clients better. Because I now had firsthand experience in terms of what families want. They want their children to be, they want to have, many families have typical children or non-disabled children, and they may have a disabled child. And they want to have the ability to seamlessly do things together, or shop together, or travel together. And so I remember when my aha came when I was working with a client in Florida, and Marcus was probably about a year or two. And this healthcare company came to me and they said, we need you to help us reach families who have disabled children throughout the state. Well, it was a wonderful, opportunity, and there was market research and whole market strategy that we developed. But in my hotel room, I had my aha of, okay, I get why Marcus is in my life, because I can serve these people, this client, better. So I guess one of the entrepreneurial insights I would offer is that when your personal life takes a detour from, the professional path that you're on, look for the opportunity in that. Look for the opportunity to understand where there's a need or fill some sort of gap that exists. So let me fast forward a little bit. So I was working in the company up in 2008. There was a little-known senator from the state of Illinois who decided he wanted to run for president. And from the moment he announced his candidacy, I was a supporter. I was hooked. And so I did some work with my peers in the disability community to help galvanize the disability vote. And so the result of that snowballed into, Carmen, we want you to go and speak at the platform hearing in Cleveland to share about disability issues. And I thought, okay, this is wild. So I went to Cleveland for a 5-minute talk. This talk here is longer than I had then. And I shared, and I told them what the prevailing issues were for the disability community. And the goal of those hearings were to help the candidate and the party determine what issues they wanted to get behind. I shared, and I thought, gosh, this was a really cool experience. Well, around the same time, the country was in an economic downturn, and my business started to slow down tremendously. And so I was working with AT&T and another healthcare company at the time, and also Darden at the time. And then, when that shift occurred, I wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready. And so I had to begin looking at opportunities elsewhere. And after President Obama's inauguration, some folks came to me and said, you know what, the administration really wants a diverse slate of candidates. Why don't you throw in your resume? And literally at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, I submitted, I hit send. Thursday, I got a call. The next week, I was headed to an interview at the Department of Agriculture, where I was hired 10 days later. They said, oh, it'll take 6 months to do the clearance and the background check, and it took 10 days. So that was supposed to be. And so while I was working at USDA, I had the awesome privilege of working with minority farmers in the South, in Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas, and helping to provide, it was very different than the work I did previously in my company, but helping to provide equity of access to USDA services and also opening up new markets. I was later promoted and became the director of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, which helped me open the doors wider for small businesses to come to USDA. It was also a perfect placement for me because it helped me understand government contracting, which I now use in my business. So I left, I was there 6 years, I served a little over 6 years, and I left the department in February of 2016. A lot of exciting projects came flooding me, and so I was able to return back. And we've had the privilege of still working with AT&T, we're working with Blue Cross Blue Shield in Texas. Also, a big break came in working with a large government prime contractor, and they asked us to sub. So, okay, thank you. So, I just wanted to share a few insights with you all that I think may help along your journey to entrepreneurship. I guess the first thing, and I guess by virtue of my life experience, I would say to you all, the first thing that came to mind was to embrace the difficulty. You know, life, you're young, bless your hearts, you're young, and there will be some peaks and valleys. It's just how life goes. And you have a decision to make about how you encounter them. And so I learned once I stopped repelling against the difficulty and I started to embrace it and lean into it, then I began to see my life's work and life's purpose open up. The second thing is detours are an opportunity to create a new path. There is no way you would have told me, if you could have told me, you'll be working for a president, you'll go to the White House, you and your daughter will go into the Oval Office and meet the president and go to all these events. There's no way that I could have ever forecasted that. And so when my new path was created, I still had the desire and the interest and the energy to get back to my business. But now that I went on that short path at USDA, I have what I need to run my business more successfully and to also take a deeper dive into government contracting. So that was exciting. There is a book by an author named Simon Sinek called, Start With Why. So many of you have to be clear when you're an entrepreneur, what is your why? It can't, as Dave shared, you can't always just be about money, but what additional value can you add? Because on the days that you do not feel like being an entrepreneur, which are many, you have to understand why you're doing it. And for me, at the core of who I am, the reason I'm doing this is because right now I know that there's some family, maybe in Minnesota or California, who's trying to figure out, where are we going to go for vacation? And it's my job to work with the company. I'm put in a proposal last week to the Dominican Republic, who's embraced accessible tourism. And they want people to make a decision to come there for vacation. So that, for me, is the big why. So other families can have access and see themselves in messaging and see themselves as employees of companies. So nobody has to go through what I went through with 31st interviews, 2 second job interviews, and I had no job when I graduated. So I had to really stay focused on my why. And then another, and you may hear some leaders talk about it, it feels a little squishy, but you gotta stay in a place of thankfulness and gratitude, because on the days that you don't feel like doing this, you gotta stay true to that. And then lastly, it's a question that a life coach posed to me that I will share with you all. When you're doing your work, and even now, just ask yourself this question: how is someone's life better as a result of crossing my path? And I want to make sure that the companies that I work with, while I know that they want to make money, and I want them to make money targeting the disability market, I want people's lives to be better as a result. Thanks so much.
Hello. So it's my honor to introduce Paul Grossinger, the next speaker, and the last speaker before the intermission. So Paul is quite the experienced entrepreneur. He founded Gangels, an investment network for LGBT founders, Blue Jay Syndicate, a syndicate for JHU-affiliated founded businesses. And he also, while at Hopkins, founded A-Level Capital, the student-run venture capital firm. In addition, He is also the chief evangelist at Imperative and co-founded Pervasive Group and L&M Media. He is a Hopkins alum from the Political Science Department, and he is also a member of the TCO Labs board. It is my honor to introduce Paul Grossinger.
So first off, Anthony and Pava are two of my favorite students from my intercession class. I'm just really proud that they've actually put TCO together and put this together and really brought entrepreneurship to campus in a student sense. That really didn't exist when I was here as a student, and I graduated in 2011, so that really wasn't all that long ago. And so, it's just really amazing that we're even sitting here having an event like this in this way. So congrats, guys. I want to talk today about failure. I think one thing that I've learned, at least so far in my career, is that you actually learn significantly more from your failures than from your successes. But, it's not enough, or at least in my personal experience, I haven't found it to be enough to just stand up there and say, I failed at this, and sort of realize that. That limited self-actualization is not enough. You really actually have to strategically and tactically dig into, well, what did I do wrong? Why did I fail? What was the organizational failure? And what was, far more importantly, my personal failure? And how can I actually operationalize what I learned from that experience and turn it into learning for your future success? And I actually think for many of you, especially those of you who start your careers in entrepreneurship young, in college or right after college, learning from why you failed in some of your early ventures and operationalizing that will make you a far more successful entrepreneur in your mid-late 20s, early 30s, whatever it might be. So, I really wanted to talk about it in the context of my own career, but looking really at, two very specific failures that I had that were not like, a bump in the road on something I was doing. It was like an actual full-on personal and organizational failure of something I was trying to do. And in each case, spent more than 1 year on the effort and what I learned from those. Because in the case of GoMail, it was a failure on the startup side, which helped me learn how to actually be more successful with Pervasive Group and Imperative. And with INE Ventures, it was actually my first attempt to lead an investment network, and it absolutely failed miserably. But there was some great learning around how to actually do syndication, which helped me learn how to do Angels and Blue Jays. So I just thought I would talk through it and really run through what my learning was from it and how I think some of you can extrapolate learning from your own failures as you advance in your careers. So to provide a little bit of initial brief context, GoMail actually was my first startup experience when I was here at Hopkins, starting in 2009 when I was a sophomore. A family friend asked me to be the project manager on an effort to essentially make email autoresponders more sexy. So many of you probably don't even know or have never used an email autoresponder, and some people still use them today, but it was a very popular way a number of years back to essentially say, hey, I'm going on vacation, or I'm not available at this time, I'll get back to you. And people felt they were very impersonal, they weren't exciting, they were ugly, and we thought, hey, we could make that more artistic. It was a classic idea that we had a big idea that really turned out to not be a great big idea. But, and it was interesting. I spent about 1.5 years on it, and it turned out we had a pledge of a large amount of money from the guy who had brought me in to lead it that mostly was not fulfilled. But for various different reasons, we completely failed as a project. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't really get any adoption. We spent some money that we never got back, and it was a big learning experience. And, for me, as I was starting my career, it was very interesting to actually have the first thing that I had actually really started out doing be kind of a colossal mishigas. And, having to really, learn from that. And so I actually spent about 16 months of my life at one time or the other. Well, I was doing other things, of course, but in my spare time in the bathroom in the morning and so forth and so on, really thinking through why we had failed, both as a project and personally as a leader. What I came up with were actually, I thought I would share them, one, because I think it's part of this exercise, but two, also because I think they're general good operational lessons for you guys to think about as you begin your own ventures. So the first thing that we failed to do was actually to understand our own market. We thought that we understood that business people had a problem with email autoresponders, but we actually realized that even though they really didn't like them, they weren't really willing to change. Business people, especially business people that use Outlook and Microsoft, are really not all that interested in changing their working habits unless they absolutely have to, and they certainly weren't interested in changing them in 2009. The other thing was, we realized that it was completely the wrong time for this kind of idea in the macroeconomic conditions of the market. It was, 2009, bleeding into 2010. The economy was in free fall. Our investor who had pledged $1 million to the project figured out that he wasn't quite as wealthy as he had thought he had been, and mostly backed out of it. And so as a result, we were far too reliant on him. The other thing that we did as a project that was a failure was we didn't really involve all of our stakeholders in a meaningful way. We had really recruited some highly meaningful talent to it, but most folks didn't have significant equity in the project. We didn't have a really good ownership structure. There was no board of governance. There was no internal stakeholder ownership. And then as an individual, I really, I failed both to create that sense of a stakeholder and also to really inspire folks, including on our own team, to be successful in the venture. And when I realized that the market conditions and the actual market base were not being receptive to the product, I was extremely bullheaded about trying to essentially barrel through it. And I actually think all those are really important lessons in entrepreneurship in general, particularly for young entrepreneurs, because as an angel in the 80+ investments I've done at this point, one of the things I've seen in a tremendous number of the early failures of startups that I've gone through are entrepreneurs that really don't understand their market. They barrel into it, and when they realize they're making mistakes, they're not actually willing to make those mistakes or to accept that they are making those mistakes, and not willing to look in the mirror and say, how can I pivot? How can I change? How can I address this? And they're not willing to have an honest conversation with themselves about that, let alone their team members and other investors. And as a result, they fail. And I think there's a huge amount of lessons in there for all of you, especially because for me, I personally failed in that regard. The second one that I want to talk about, is to talk a little bit about how you apply those lessons to, your next phases in your career. Because I think it's one thing to stand up and just be like, I failed, I didn't do this right, and then not really apply it for the future. And that's really only a third of the battle. You have to actually tactically think, how can I apply these lessons to my next startups? So one thing I tried to do, I co-founded Pervasive Group in late 2012. We do mobile device management on Android devices, and most of our business is in either Google Play or with some select carriers and OEMs. And we've managed to make it pretty successful to date, although I haven't been day-to-day on the company in a year and a half or 2 years or so. But, one thing that we did really well really early was we actually, made sure that everybody who was involved in the project was a co-founder, was engaged, was involved in the board process, and really felt like they were a stakeholder in the project. One of the other things we did, and I was very aggressive about this because I had done it so badly with GoMail, was, we were building essentially an application that controls Android devices from one other Android device. And so a huge amount of what we had to do is actually figure out, well, what things do people want? Do they want to prevent texting and driving? Do they want to prevent certain types of text messages being sent? Do they want in-app control? And so I really became a proponent, and still am a proponent today, of continual testing, almost the Eric Ries lean startup model theory of things. You have to build, iterate, test, build, iterate, test. I would encourage all of you, as you're thinking about your companies, to really take that ethos of it. Don't start something with the idea that you have all the answers from day one. You should just raise a boatload of money from people that just let you do your stuff and go figure it out. Really iterate, raise what you need, get really smart stakeholders around the company, make them feel ownership in it, and actually learn as you go and test as you go. The other thing that we really did was we we were able to learn how to pivot when we reached challenges. I failed very much in that regard in my first initiative. And both Pervasive Group and Imperative, which does purpose-based human resources, and which I didn't co-found, but I was the first investor and chief evangelist and board member, and Gangels has led both of their rounds. We faced significant operational challenges on both of those companies. In Pervasive Group's case, we had major competitors. You had carriers wanting to come in that market. You had the issue of people's habits around how they use their phones continually evolving. In Imperative's case, you had a clear recognition that there was a major problem in use of purpose in human resources, testing for purpose, and retention of employees in general. But the path to actually finding the right solutions was quite cluttered with issues. And I think if I had taken the attitude that I took with GoMail of just sort of bullheadedly moving forward and not really making any changes to either the product or our approach to it, even though we did have a good handle on the market in these cases, we would have failed. We really had to be quite agile about how we pivoted. So the second piece of this, I want to address the second piece of my career, which is I've branched out from entrepreneurship, where I still feel like an entrepreneur, and I'm still somewhat, not day-to-day, but more week-to-week involved in some companies. But really moved into investing. And I started investing a little bit in 2012 and then embraced it more in early 2013. But it was actually INE Ventures in 2013 and early 2014 was really my first effort to actually raise my own fund and lead my own investment initiative. And unlike most of the Harvard Business School graduates out there that succeed on their first try, I failed quite miserably in that endeavor. The idea for INE Ventures was to invest in Israeli companies based in Israel and then take them over to the States and help them grow and realize the valuation differential that existed at that time between Israeli companies and US companies. And interestingly, we did fund a few companies with INE, two of which have done very, very well, especially NoMail, which does AI for email. But the venture itself did not work. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the specific mistakes that I made in that case, again, because I think that both from the standpoint of general entrepreneurship as well as the standpoint for those of you who are interested in actually getting to investing and running your own investment initiatives, I think it's highly relevant. But then also because my failures with INE Ventures were directly correlated to what we did well with Gangels and Blue Jay. Really quite correlated. So the first thing I did wrong with INE Ventures was I chose the wrong co-founder. My co-founder, who I do owe significant credit for helping find NoMail, really had issues with honesty and issues with inability to deliver. And at the time, I also did. But it's super important for all of you when you're creating your first ventures or creating your first funds, arguably more important in the case of funds because you're tied together for a long time, to choose the right person. It's absolutely essential. So I highly recommend that you work with people that you know well and you respect and you view as either a peer or a mentor or both. When I moved on to do Gangels, I ended up working with David Beatty, who's a mentor of mine. I had met him through Start Out and who I knew and trusted before we started Gangels. And who I really don't know anybody who is more honest and more capable and more effective and more able to actually clean up all the messes that I make on the front end and make sure that stuff actually gets done. So choosing your co-founder is so incredibly important. The other thing was, and this is another one that I think a lot of young entrepreneurs and also young fund leaders do, but it was especially true for me, was I totally overestimated both my own knowledge set and my own ability to lead something at that time without help. And I also mistook my own real skill set within investing. And I think people do that often. You both overestimate your own capabilities and you misunderstand what those capabilities are. And I think those are things that are really good to watch out for and think through as you operationalize your own failures that you will inevitably have. For me, it was really the fact that I thought that I already had the track record to lead an investment group, and I really didn't. I had some more growing to do. And I also thought that I knew the Israeli market, maybe by virtue of having Israeli relatives and by being Jewish and whatnot, and I really didn't. And I also thought that I had the right skill set of actually putting in the operations of how to move founders from one place to the other and help them on their logistics. And that's actually not my skill set. I've discovered over time that my skill set is really meeting great entrepreneurs and identifying great entrepreneurs and helping them through network relationships and thought process. And I need somebody else, like my colleague David, who's actually really good at the operations, getting the deals done, making sure that everything happens on the paperwork side, making sure that they have things like resources and office space and whatnot. Those are not my skill sets. And so I think as you think through your own careers, you really have to identify somebody that complements the skill sets that you have. And you really have to make sure that you're not ultimately trying to be an amazing generalist at everything. You should really try to identify what you're really good at, be really good at that, and then find people that you trust and appreciate and want to work with to complement those skill sets because they have different but equally strong skill sets to yourself. And so given the fact that we're running a bit over and I don't really want to wax on forever, I'd love to leave you guys with a few major thoughts. The most important thing is to work with the right people when you're doing entrepreneurship or doing a fund. And you also have to really think through what white space am I filling? Why is this important? And you have to know your market and the issue that you're addressing really well. If you don't know the issue that you're addressing all that well, and that was my big failure both with GoMail and INE, among other things, you really will not succeed. And the last is you have to know your own skill sets and play to your own strengths and actually really leverage talent around you to address those appropriately. And the last piece to really loop back to the topic of this, and I think is maybe the most important lesson in entrepreneurship in general, is to actually fully operationalize your failures. All your actual successes teach you is that you were successful and some of that was good, but some of it was bad. You don't really know what the good from the bad was. It's your failures that allow you to really cut in there and dig in and say, okay, both overall this was bad, but then specifically this was wrong, and this was wrong. And I could have done it this way, and this way. And I should actually do that in my next case. And if you can not just say that to yourself, but you can actually turn around and do it and really, concretely identify those things and internalize it to the point that you actually don't make those mistakes in the future, and you rinse and repeat that with each subsequent failure you have in your career, because you will ultimately have many, and that's okay, then in the end you will succeed. So thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Brooke Stephanian, and I am a co-founder and chief innovation officer of TCO Labs. Thank you so much for coming to TCO's inaugural Hatch Innovation Conference. We hope you are proud of the fact that your presence here means you are a key part of the growing Hopkins entrepreneurial network. As we wrap up our first speaker symposium, we are incredibly excited to be able to bring the best of Baltimore and regional entrepreneurship to you in our startup showcase. Don't miss any of our workshops where you will have the chance to engage with seasoned entrepreneurs as they discuss incorporation, startup culture, and financing, and more. The workshops will take place here in room 110. Finally, put your best ideas to the test by entering Contrary Capital's Idea Raffle, where the submitter of the best idea will receive a $100 gift card. There will also be separate raffles for Amazon gift cards. Your raffle tickets can be found in your bags that you received at registration. Again, thank you so much for coming today to attend Hatch 2017. We hope you're inspired by our stories. We hope you're inspired by the stories of our entrepreneurs and take what you learned today to bring your own vision to the world.
Coming up next, we have a fantastic selection of speakers. We have Mr. Richard May from Innovation Village. We have Dr. Ben Hwang, who came all the way from San Francisco to be here today. And we have Kelly Keenan-Trumpbour, who flew in from Boston this morning. So let me please welcome Mr. Brian Fogelson, who's going to come up and introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Rich May is the CEO and chairman of Innovation Village, the first innovation business district in Baltimore. Through Innovation Village, Rich May promotes entrepreneurship, provides job opportunities, and supports small businesses in West Baltimore. Rich is a pioneer whose work aims to supplement the rich culture and history of Baltimore with business opportunities. Before Innovation Village, Rich served as a senior manager with Deloitte, an executive producer in Hollywood, and helped get startups off the ground. I am pleased to introduce to you Rich May.
Only one. I'm the only one to speak. Cool. So how's everyone doing? Okay, good. You got a lot of energy. It's late in the afternoon, so I'm glad to hear it. So glad to be here and just have a real conversation. I like two-way conversations, so I'm not going to speak a lot. I'm going to ask some questions, get some back and forth going. So Innovation Village, thanks for the introduction. We have 1,300-acre business innovation district in Central and West Baltimore now. What's really interesting is, you know, we believe two basic things. We believe, number one, everyone matters. And then number two, that everyone has talent. And because of that, cities like Baltimore can win if we organize that talent in a very particular way around generating small businesses, not just techies, but literally small businesses, neighborhood level retail, and yes, innovation-based enterprises, so that we solve our communities and our cities' most pressing needs. And so how do we do that? So we literally elevate cities like Baltimore by, one, including everyone, creating inclusive economies, and putting our entrepreneurs in a position to succeed. And so, Mike Benko, he's a good friend, and the work that they've been doing with Startup Maryland is really interesting. How you need people to bring people together. And so we're seeing this in different cities. So, a lot of times we bag on Baltimore a lot, but this is city by city around the country, trying to figure out what is the future, because it's happening at such a fast rate right now. And then on the other side of it, it's really easy to talk about entrepreneurship. It's really easy to talk about startups. It's really easy to talk about risk taking. And I always liken it to, it's real easy when we're sitting here in Baltimore to talk about how much money we're going to make when we go and gamble in Vegas, right? And then when we get to Vegas, it's like you don't want to call home and say, hey, I need a plane ticket home because I just lost everything. Entrepreneurship is kind of like that, right? It's easy to talk about. It's a lot harder to do. And that's why we go back to what we believe, that everyone has talent. And so the question is, do I really believe that my business is dependent on you? That the success of Innovation Village, in this case, is really dependent on you and everyone in this room? Do I really believe that? And do entrepreneurs really believe, when we talk about ecosystem or talk about community, do we really believe that the success of our enterprise, bringing our idea to market, really depends on the person sitting next to you, or the person that you haven't met yet, or the person that you're about to bump into tomorrow? Now that we're all moving fast forward into the future now, what I call the now future of this shared economy, what does that really mean? It really means more than ever. We are more connected now in the last 10 years than we have in the previous 5,000 years of human history that's been recorded. I mean, when you really think about the way we're connected, I literally just got up here from the TomTom Innovation Conference in Charlottesville, and it was incredible because in Charlottesville, I probably met more people from Richmond and Durham, even though I was just in Richmond a week ago, through people that I met through Mike and Gabe, and Larkin Garby's doing incredible work down in Richmond. And so she was like, did you hear about TomTom? I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, just show up. I'm like, okay, well, it's the weekend. Okay, fit it in. And the amount of just exchange of ideas and then immediate commitment. It was just immediate commitment. It was mutual commitment. Not, okay, yeah, we're going to support Innovation Village. No, it was about, oh, we can support each other. Why? Because we have the same challenges. And so, when we're talking about, what you have to do to sacrifice to have a successful enterprise, whatever it is, right? There's sacrifice involved. There's risk-taking involved. And so that's part of the conversation we were going to have today. And so it's easier for me to take questions about different types of things you're interested in, because I know we're talking about risk-taking and some of the struggles that go along with being an entrepreneur. So I just want to open up to the floor, and I will answer truthfully and honestly whatever you ask. So let's go for it. Any questions around entrepreneurship, startups, and what it really takes? Go ahead.
Hello, my name is John Rattray.
Hi, John.
My question is can you speak to wanting to speak about an idea without having any sort of patent protection on it, and the risks involved with that?
So that's a great question. Every business is different. Every idea is different. I will say that the answer to that 5-10 years ago is certainly different than how I would answer it now. I would say that right now, it's always important to protect your intellectual property. So I will state that point blank. It's always important to protect your IP, but not at the expense of getting your idea moving and building teams around your idea. So a lot of time we can do paralysis by analysis, and we're just like this. We are in a shared global economy. It's about who moves fast and who builds teams fastest that can get their product into the marketplace. So you definitely want to protect yourself, but you want to focus on other aspects as well, like getting your idea, like what Mike was saying, getting people who support your idea, getting different skill sets around you, build out your management team. Like, we all talk about always, it's about your team. Teams win. And so, you can be an all-star on your own. You have the greatest idea in the world, but unless you have a team around you, when I was speaking at South by Southwest, heard something very profound on a panel, because I never really thought about it. They asked, what was the difference between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla? And it was like, Edison had a financial backer, J.P. Morgan, and a team behind him in a way that just got his ideas into the market a lot faster.
Hi, my name is Francis Guevara. I want to know how you can form that team, or how you can find these people and be connected with them. Because this is my first time I go to an entrepreneurship convention, kind of, and I want to know how I can get more involved into this world.
So so there's the technical side where you have to be strategic. I kind of look at it as if you have a band, right? You need a lead singer, you need a guitarist, you need a drummer. You have certain key roles and responsibilities. So no matter what your business is, you need certain key skill positions, right? So you're going to have a visionary leader, or the person who has the vision and the strategy and is driving the enterprise. You need a finance person. You need an operations person at some point in time. So as you grow, you're going to need different types of team members. But it really comes through this. It's really, we call it the big mashup, or we call it peanut butter and jelly. Don't hang around people. If you're peanut butter, if you love peanut butter, don't only hang around people who love peanut butter. Hang around people who are jelly. Hang around people who are bread. And so when you get around people that are different from you, and so that's why when we talk to decision makers, and Mike and I go through all this all the time, and Gabe especially with his new model is like, decision makers like, we don't understand it, we don't get it. I'm like, it's literally as simple as peanut butter and jelly. It's your peanut butter, your jelly, your bread. We're going to mash you together, and you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out together. And then also through the coaching side, advisors, mentors, peers, asking them, hey, I'm no good at the legal side, right? I'm no good at, IP. So what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? It's really just keeping connected, really having real authentic conversations with one another. And I'll say, and I'll answer it this way, and don't try to do everything by yourself. I think for the type of personalities that tend to take risk and want to start their own enterprise, they're naturally comfortable and confident in themselves, and they feel like they have to do everything. So I can't overstate that, so how many people are actually here from Baltimore, like originally, like grew up in the Baltimore area? So, most of us are Ravens fans. I know there's a couple Steelers fans in here. Don't raise your hand. There, I knew it was going to come. There's always one. But we always say is, Ray Lewis wasn't just Ray Lewis because he was Ray Lewis. He had Ed Reed standing behind him. So it's your team. And while we are all rock stars and individually talented, when we come together as a team, we win.
Hi there. Oh, wow. I'm Hwang. I'm from Fed News. I'm actually here because I'm an entrepreneur moonlighting as a media producer. And so you're saying that this is like putting together a band. I booked artists my whole life. And right now, what do you recommend for somebody who's going from booking artists and producing their music and trying to build a label and, getting them on ASCAP and stuff to getting it more streamlined to be, to have this syndication, to have a record label that's fully functioning, like you yourself worked in entertainment. What advice could you give me?
So there's two pieces of it. It's still about your team. I think the way you can build your team, especially in entertainment, is totally different than it was even 3 years ago. So this is where tech really becomes a tool. It's not tech for tech itself, but tech to make things easier. You can set up deals. You can even produce music, or you can connect musically, like on Smule right now, right? You can literally co-produce music through an app right now, right? So I think it's really coming up with a business model of where you want to find your niche in the marketplace, also understanding where the gap is in the marketplace, and then, from a label standpoint, let me ask you this way: so is the label where you want to go? Is that your goal? Then that's where, from the legal side, just from my experience, start with the entertainment lawyer, because they're gonna build the structure that you're gonna need based on where you are right now. You have clients, or you have acts that you?
Yeah, we have a lot of acts. Some have been featured on CNN. Like one of our rappers was the first to make a music video in North Korea. I work as a journalist.
Yeah.
This is my night job.
Okay.
So this is what you have to do. So you're saying start with the entertainment board to build the umbrella first.
Yes, and it's the structuring of it that's key. But I know who you are, so I'm happy to answer even more detail later after we finish. But yeah, that's awesome though.
So how does focusing on an entire city as almost a business idea differ from focusing on an individual business itself? And what kind of challenges do you feel you face with a city like Baltimore?
So that's a great question. I honestly think it's the same. I mean, just from my experience, I've built companies before, all different types of industries. It's really the same mindset. It's just the scale is different. But at the end of the day, you really still have to focus on your core business, and you have to focus on execution. So for us, even though we have 1,300-acre district, so it's not the entire city, we do have a large geographic area that we have to create the conditions, we have to create the environment where capital can find talent, talent can find capital, entrepreneurs and startups have real estate, they have capital, and they know where their partnerships and teams are going to come from, and then programs that support that. So we call that the 4 legs of the stool. It's really about real estate, capital, talent, and then programming that ties all that together in a way that supports and scales companies, especially young companies. But at the same time, you have to have a geographic area of focus, and I think that's been part of the challenge, and Mike has alluded to a lot of it, is where we're looking at peer cities that are really outperforming. I mean, when I say peer cities, I would even throw in, Chattanooga, right? Chattanooga is outpunching its weight when it comes to innovation. I'm in Charlottesville hearing about Chattanooga, right? And it's you look in the news around innovation, and they're like, Innovation District, Chattanooga, the stories that are coming out of that are, being celebrated, and I'm like, hey, right on, you're doing great. But in Baltimore, I think it's very hard for capital to find where the talent is. See, I'm getting a lot of nods. It's like, and for talent to actually find where the capital is? And do we have inclusive real estate-based places and spaces that facilitate that? So I think a lot of stuff happens around universities here in this town, which is great, but not everybody goes to a university. You know, you have 600 some thousand people in this town. How many actually attend local universities here? So there's a whole market out there where I really feel like what we've already demonstrated in a very short period of time is that you still have to remain focused on building companies and that create jobs that people in the city can actually work in. And so there's that matching up of the pipeline of skill sets, talent, and also what the industries of the future require as far as skill sets, and having people like us connect those dots. I think that's what's going to make Baltimore really stand out globally, is when we figure out how to train people with the skills that are going to be necessary for the jobs of the future. Yes.
Kind of piggybacking off of what she was saying in the front, as far as like, my name's Jeffrey Banks. I'm a spoken word artist and poet. You know, they only I have recorded, but realizing with CDs and all that you can do visually, there's a learning curve. I consider things like this kind of like business speed dating, but you know, there is the thing of my concern, comment, question would be more so that the one-man band, because you really can trust a whole lot of folks, and if you do partner with people, I mean, I guess your thought on more consultants for hire, because I mean, like, you know, a lot of lawyers aren't going to be part of your team. You want to pay me, that's fine, and a lot of times they may try to take you down a rabbit hole to keep you paying, even though you really don't have that shoestring. But if you try to talk about lawyers or accountants or all the other type of stuff, I mean, pretty much like when I did produce my one CD, you know, most producers were just concerned about getting that quick money and wasn't trying to have like some longevity of, I know A&R shop consider radio and you worked in entertainment, but what's your thought on consultants, people who really just want to get hired and that creates jobs, but not really team building? Because coming from the church saying Nehemiah, I'm a builder of one, there's not many people trying to help build me. They just want to be on what you on and up there.
Yep. So I'll say this, more so than ever now, talent, it dominates everything. If you have talent and you've really applied yourself to your craft and you have talent, you can go out and get followers. I mean, you can go out and get a following of 2,000 people that are into your thing. It's easier to do now than it's ever been, right? And so with that following, one of the things that we do with a lot of our enterprises is we go out and show and prove first. So we show that, okay, we have this many customers or this many people who are viewers or in this case, you have this many followers of your art. And what that's going to do is it's going to attract the attention of different team members that you're going to need, whether it's entertainment attorney or an accountant, and get them to invest in your future based on what you've already demonstrated you can deliver. You know, Mike used the term equity at that point in time. We're doing the same thing with Innovation Village. We have one of the top law firms in the Mid-Atlantic. Once they saw how much deal flow we were able to generate, and at the same time have the support of, you know, thousands of people in the city, we got them pro bono. So they're handling all our real estate transactions and all our venture transactions and now all our talent acquisition transactions. So I think that's probably the best way to do it. I will also agree with you that doing it on a consulting basis is probably the best way before you get locked into a long-term contractual situation. You want them to be able to prove that they have as much talent doing what they do as you have talent doing what you do.
Well, I mean, I guess just offline, the quick thing would just be the monetize. I mean, I got 10,000 social media followers, but still, like, you know, even though people can be impressed with your skill and borrowing's a skill, you know, some people will try to pimp that borrowing or free or whatever the case is. You can make somebody a lot of money, but that reciprocity isn't quite there.
So I'd say this is a perfect example where have some advisors who can give you that 360 view. You always bounce it off of people to say, hey, should I trust this situation? What do you think about this situation? How would you structure this situation? And I can connect you with actually a couple people who can help you with that. Happy to do it.
Richie, you and Michael had some very good things. Entrepreneurs going to the top but don't do it themselves. We're hearing some of the concerns that they are trying to do things on themselves and pointing them back to the scene. How important is it to leverage resources, find resources, connect the resources to what an entrepreneur is doing?
I think it's everything. And resources come in different forms. And it's not just capital, but it's relationships. And I think, our relationships are networks. Your network is now your most important resource, because in your network, you're going to find the solution to your challenge. It's, we talk about serendipity a lot, just because it's amazing when people come together. We all wear the same jersey, the same color. We're all running the same plays together. When people believe in one another and you start supporting each other, it's amazing what comes out of your own network. It's almost like gravitational pull. It comes to you. So yeah, the resources are incredibly important. I think pulling those resources in a way that makes sense is also important, which is why you need other team members. I'm not great at everything. I was like, seriously, it's the marketing part, and there's a whole lot of stuff I'm not good at. So what I do is I just talk to people and say, hey, I'm not good at it. You and I just had a conversation the other day. You're like, I know somebody. I mean, literally, this guy saw me in his office, and I'm going into the elevator, and he runs out and says, hey, I have someone to connect you to. Now, the important piece of that is we're only good as our response to the resource offered. So how we handle each other's relationships within our network is actually vital to how fast you can bring resources to bear and also manage those resources appropriately.
Is it also important for those resources that you're receiving? Is it also important that they can see positive outcome for them also, enjoying where they're.
Yes, and I think this ties together the way I'll answer this ties together a couple of questions about IP and trust. We always talk about creating win-wins from day one. If you are focused on going to the person that you need help from and saying, first, what can I do for you? What's your biggest challenge? Let's figure out together how we solve each other's challenges. Automatically, that establishes the basis of the relationship on trust as opposed to selfishness. And then from there, you can really talk about how you bring those resources together in a way that makes sense, but also being very clear with the other person based on what they need or what they want, that you're going to move in a way that creates benefit for them while they're creating benefit for you. With us, that's been the sense of mutuality and the culture that we've established with Innovation Village, where whether it was our university partners or entrepreneurs or venture capital partners or our real estate developer partners, we automatically delivered value to them first before we even asked for anything in return. Short?
Yes.
How short?
Sorry, yeah. Thank you
like
so
we're
much.
done? Okay, great.
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So right now I am very happy to introduce Dr. Ben Hwang. He has been on the forefront of cutting-edge biological research from even a young age. When he started out as an undergraduate researcher in Leroy Hood's lab at Caltech. From there, he went and received his PhD in biology from Hopkins, and has now been making waves in all areas of biological research. First as a consultant at McKinsey, and later as the head of the Asia Pacific region for life sciences technology. And now he is currently the chairman and CEO of Profusa, a biotech company in San Francisco, developing technology to stream biological data directly to a wearable smart device, effectively revolutionizing the field of health. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Hwang to all of you.
Thanks, Emily.
In the spirit of recruiting talent, I think I just found my press secretary, so I appreciate it. Thank you. It's great to be back at the Homewood campus. I was just commenting coming back here. I left in 2001, and Emily says, "Oh gosh, I don't think I've been alive that long," or something like that. Made me feel a little bad, but it's okay. It's great to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about my company right now, what we're doing, and hopefully that'll give you a bit of context on why I'm here. And then perhaps at that point I'll ask for your indulgence, because I'll share a few stories that I think still it's true that these are stories that only my mother would care about. But hopefully there'll be little bits and pieces of nuggets on my career progression and how I became an entrepreneur and the successes and failures that we've had. And perhaps there's something that you could actually glean and take away from. So what do? Profusa is a medical device company. We're in a very regulated space, FDA, CE approval, because we actually put a little sensor inside somebody's body. But that sensor, what that sensor could do. The sensor is basically a little piece of hydrogel, and that allows you to, like wearing a Fitbit, but instead of counting steps, it's able to give you biochemistry information that currently can only be gotten by getting a vial of blood drawn. And the data acquisition is completely non-invasive. It's real time, so managing diabetes, managing COPD, chronic health, becomes possible, and really changes the way a physician and a patient could interact in a very time and distance agnostic way. We've solved a biological problem that has plagued the industry for about 50 years, so it's a really important scientific breakthrough and able to leverage that in a space that we think will have a huge amount of impact throughout the world. We are venture-backed. We've raised so far about $40 million or so US dollars to date. We're at 35 employees, probably another 10 consultants, and at any given moment through our collaborations and grants, probably another 20 or so people working on our behalf. So it's a pretty hefty organization. We received CE approval, so we're regulatory approved in Europe, and just launched our first product last year. So it's been a long journey, but I think we've gotten some success and some traction. Hopefully some of these experiences could be beneficial to you. Okay, so now with that background, I'm going to share with you literally stories that I think only my mom cares about. And hopefully you guys will get a kick out of it too. I was asked to talk about experiences and successes and failures that might be helpful to an entrepreneur. And it's really tough to tease that out, quite frankly. Everybody's gotten just incredible advice throughout the day, I think, on some of the mechanics and what's important and what's not important and how to do things. Some of those I agree with, some of those I don't, but regardless, I think most of our experiences are going to be very unique and very individualized, and our journey is going to be very unique and individualized. So what I'm trying to do over the next 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so, is just share some thoughts, how I got here, and how I found that journey to be helpful. I'm a very, very lucky guy. I really am. I think short of winning the Powerball or Mega Millions, I think I'm probably as lucky as anybody could actually be. I've got a great family. I have great children. And at a very young age, I had the experience of working for the Dodgers. At the age of 17, I joined the organization as a bat boy. And by the time I was 18 years old, I went into the front office. Because literally, there's only one Batman. Like, once you turn 18, there's only one Batman. You can't be a bat boy anymore. And Batman lives in Gotham City and not in L.A., so I can't be a Batman anymore. And so I had to go into the front office, and I got in the front office as a publicity intern and kind of worked my way up and ran promotions after a while. My experience at Dodger Stadium was this. I'm really incredibly lucky to have gotten that role. People ask me, how did you get that job, right? How did that happen? And my stock answer is looks, charm, and personality, right? With this package, how can you not get that job? The actual answer is my dad knew somebody who knew somebody and got me in. My biggest fear at that time was, at the age of 17, my life peaked. That was a genuine fear, because if you're a baseball fan, there's nothing better than playing catch in the outfield of Wrigley Field with Fernando Valenzuela, who was a big star at the time, with John Fogerty's center field playing over the speakers. It's just a mind-blowing experience as a kid. And I didn't want that experience to end. And so when it was time for me to leave, there's not like a retirement age, nothing like that. It was just, I was 18, I was getting kind of silly, right? Some of the players are younger than me. I literally just raised my hand and went to the front office and asked, is there anything I could do for you in the front office as an uneducated, high school dropout, 18-year-old kid? You need trash cans and you need empty? I'm the man. Do you guys have toilets that you need scrubbed? Count me in. What can I do for you? Put your name in every single hat. For me, that worked great because it led to, sure, come on, we need people to actually make photocopies. By the way, photocopies, this thing is this big machine, and you put paper on, and then another sheet of paper comes out. In the olden days, the press box had these press releases that you would hand out by paper instead of email, and somebody needed to do that, to actually make photocopies. I was going through reams and reams of paper. Needed somebody to actually operate that instrument. Count me in, I'm there. And through the process of putting your name in every single hat, or putting my name in every single hat, I was fortunate that the other person on the other side of the conversation gave me a chance, and I was able to progress through the organization. I had a reasonably, kind of fun time and successful career in professional sports. How did that translate into entrepreneurship? There were some conversations earlier on, and it's actually served me well, even at Profusa. I talk to everybody about what I do. I literally talk to everybody about what I do. You're interested in help? Come talk to me later. I will share with you what I do. I need somebody to invest money in. Oh, but you're a little earlier stage investor rather than what I need. I don't care. I'm going to talk to you. Because you don't know who that person knows and the introductions that other individual actually can make. I talk to everybody. And my advice to you is, if you're a young entrepreneur and you're a student, and let's say you want to create the next biggest app doing something, and has nothing to do with biochemical sensing in a regulated space, I would expect every one of you at the end of this, over dinner, wherever, come up and ask me for a card, right? Talk to everybody about your idea. You never know how somebody's going to be able to help you. I let it slip in a public forum that I'm a high school dropout, which is true. One of the things is I wasn't that disciplined as a kid, and when you have a choice between going to school or going to Dodger Stadium, I went to Dodger Stadium, right? So I stopped going to high school as a junior. After leaving the Dodgers, I was 23 years old, and I thought, oh gosh, I got to go back to school. I mean, this is kind of silly, right? And so I took the GED and in the state of California, enrolled in Pasadena City College, a community college, wonderful school. It's the home of Jackie Robinson. That's where Jackie Robinson actually went to school before he went to UCLA on an athletic scholarship. And PCC, once again, my second lucky break, PCC was about 2 blocks away from Caltech. And during my summer there at PCC, I decided to get a job, and it was between getting a job at Eddie Bauer selling shirts or getting a job in the lab, because at that time I was pre-med, getting a job at a lab. And I decided to get a job at a lab, went to Caltech, knocked on every single door I possibly can, because remember, talk to everybody, right? And finally got directed to the office of the academic department in the Department of Biology, gave me a catalog, and my request was, I'll do anything. I'll scrub toilets, I'll wash test tubes. By the way, I don't have a fetish with toilets. It's like the second time. I just realized it's like the second time I raised, I'm talking about scrubbing toilets. Yeah. Anyways, so I knocked on doors. And this goes to show you how little I knew about science, biology, and how an academic institution worked. I was a PCC, right? Community college. I got the catalog home, and I thought to myself, Caltech was a pretty good school. I don't know anything. If I join a lab with 4 people, I increased the size of that lab by 25%, I'd stick out like a sore thumb. So I'm going to find the biggest lab I could possibly find, and they probably have a lot of research money. They could absorb me, and I could hide, and it wouldn't matter. So at that time, the lab was Lee Hood's lab at the Beckman Institute. He had probably 220 or so people in his lab at the time, just humongous, well-funded place. So I showed up in Lee's office and knocked on the door. And I'll make a long story short, they had this research fellowship, and I was encouraged to apply for that research fellowship. I got the application. I went back to the school, filled it out, and then walked back over and then said, "Here's my application to the Hood Lab." And before I said anything, the application literally was blank, right? Because you imagine a fellowship application is where you went to school, what science classes have you taken, right? What's your research background? How many papers have you published? Where have you given talks, et cetera? And I was at community college. I got nothing. So it was, NA. I had a general chemistry class, and I had a general biology class. And once again, it's the whole, I'll scrub toilet line, right? It's like, you don't have to pay me. But lo and behold, second lucky break, Lee Hood gave me one of the spots out of the 10. The other 9 were Harvard, Brown, MD, PhD candidates. I was the only community college kid. I got to tell you, my first day that I showed up, and there was a debrief, or not a debrief, a welcome. And I didn't know what DNA was, 5 prime, 3 prime, what does that mean? Literally, I had no foundational knowledge. And I went home and I thought to myself, gosh, by the way, how much time do I have?
16, 17 minutes.
Oh, it's a 30-minute time block?
No.
20-minute time block? Okay. Good. I literally went back and I thought to myself, what am I doing? Right? Talk about sticking like a sore thumb. What am I doing? Little did I know Lee Hood is one of the most famous scientists at the time in the field of biology and biochemistry. He invented this automated DNA sequencer. As a matter of fact, when I was there, I saw the poster that was up there, capillary electrophoresis sequencing. And I determined that, anything worthwhile doing is worthwhile doing. Go do it. And instead of being intimidated by the brain power around me, and instead of being intimidated by absolutely just the top-notch academic pedigree that's around, let's see if we get inspired instead. Don't be intimidated by what you're about to embark on. Try to be inspired, because I'll tell you, anything worth doing probably has an element of intimidation to it. When you think about it, right? If you want an ability to impact 500 million people for whatever endeavor that you're about to embark on doing, that thought is quite intimidating. By the way, if it doesn't intimidate you, come talk to me later, because it should scare the bejesus out of you. And yet, be inspired by that mission rather than being intimidated by that mission. And as soon as I actually had that change in my mindset that, wow, while this is intimidating, it's true, gosh, imagine what these guys are doing, right? Building a capillary electrophoresis instrument that actually takes DNA sequence from 150 bases, if you're lucky, over 3 to 4 days, to being able to do that in an hour. That's really kind of rock star stuff, and that's awesome. Let's be a part of this. Don't be afraid to be a part of something that's actually much bigger than you. And then, so I went there, did my thing in the summer. Lee was kind, and at the end of the summer, he asked, so Ben, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, I'm going to go to school, right? So I'm transferring from PCC, and I'm going to transfer to University of Southern California, the Trojans. And Lee was thoughtful. He was nice, and he said, well, that's a great school. It's a fine school. Why are you going there? And I said, well, they gave me a scholarship, right? My family was poor. I couldn't afford to write a check. They gave me a bit of a scholarship to go. Says, well, you might be able to. If you have a chance to go somewhere else, would you? Because I think you might try a place like Hopkins. So for those of you who don't know, Lee actually got his MD. He's an MD PhD, got his PhD at Caltech, and he's got an MD at medical school here at Johns Hopkins. And so, anyways, he made a call. Third lucky moment, right? Third call. I came on campus, went to Mud Hall, interview with Doug Fambro, who was a professor at the time, and then got a nice letter in the mail saying, "Hey, congratulations, you're accepted." I still went to SC for a while because it's timing, right? So I transferred in the winter, but I still showed up at SC in the fall. Did reasonably well at SC, and I came here. Now, for those of you who are undergraduates here, I don't know what it is like now, but when I was going to school here, and I can't believe I just turned into that guy who went back to his old school to say when I was going to school there, when I was going to school here, lot of pre-meds. There was a word called throatism. There were throats, right? Like people who were really, really grubby for grades and wanted to get into medical school. And I was intimidated. The only academic experience that I had at the time was at PCC and was at USC. And USC was like the funnest 2.5 months I've ever had in my life. It was great. But I was really scared. I was scared. I didn't know. I never took a biochemistry class. Organic chemistry at Hopkins scared the crap out of me. So for the first time I showed up, every night I was studying. I would show up at the lab to do a little work, and I'd go back and I'd study. I had no fun whatsoever. First test came by. I showed up, did the thing, and then I realized, gosh, I could hang. And then, of course, I stopped studying. After I found that out, I started working in the lab and started having fun. Listen, why is this important? If you are here, you are motivated to do something great. If you are here, you are smart enough and accomplished enough to actually do something great. Do not let the successes of others dictate to you an established benchmark of what you could actually accomplish. It's hogwash, right? If you have a chance to pitch in front of Kleiner Perkins, and you have a chance to actually pitch in front of Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, don't be intimidated by it. You could hang. You could absolutely hang. Be prepared, be energetic, be willing to put in the work, but don't let the reputation, the stories, the myth, and the press headlines define for you what you should do or what you shouldn't do, right? Put in the work and you could hang. Lucky moment number 4, McKinsey and Company. Can I rewind this? There's a stop clock here, or a stopwatch here. I was just saying, like, get more time. McKinsey and Company came to Hopkins and recruited for 1 year, 1 year only. And I was fortunate enough to actually show up. It was a career-defining moment for me when I actually got the offer. So here it is, right? McKinsey, one of the more prestigious companies to work for. I went through the interview process, got turned down, called them back and said, "You guys are making a mistake. You shouldn't turn me down because I'm actually pretty good." They reconsidered, went through the interview process again, and they hired me. On my first study at McKinsey, I don't have an MBA, right? I'm a nerd. I'm a PhD scientist. I don't have an MBA, so I don't know what Excel was. This was during the time when I was giving a scientific talk. You used to have to take pictures and then glue them on, and then take a slide and then project it. There's nothing like PowerPoint. And so you show up in a study, and the first thing that they do is you got to do this analysis. And I had no idea how to do it. I kid you not, this sounds like a joke, but it isn't. They asked me to build a model, a financial model, a little simple financial model. I didn't realize that if you put equal sign in the cell, it'll do the calculations for you. Yeah, I know you're laughing, right? But it's true. It's pathetic. So guess what I did? Hopkins PhD, advising Mercedes-Benz, at the time Daimler Chrysler was called, on their portfolio company working on about a $2.5 billion problem with really high-powered global strategic consulting firm. I spent my entire time ordering pizza. I kid you not. I couldn't do anything else. I ordered pizza. The team stayed there until 1 o'clock in the morning. They're hungry. What do you guys want? I'm happy to order. You know what that taught me? And it's a lesson we talk about kind of roles and responsibilities and team here. Listen, ordering pizza is not beneath anybody, right? As an entrepreneur, as somebody who's leading a small team, what's important? It's your mission and your team, period, right? Can you accomplish what you set out to accomplish? And what's your hand in that? If you guys come up to me, ask me later on, you have this fancy business card that says chairman and CEO, that title means squat. I mean, it does. In the boardroom, it does in terms of my shares, it does in a legal sense. But in general, the more important metrics, how are you doing? What's the progression of your business? How are you actually accomplished what you set out to do? That means nothing. It's all about being able to empower your team to actually do it better. And whatever role that you could possibly play at that given moment, feel free to play it, even though you have a fancy title like founder or CEO. At McKinsey, in the office of Daimler Chrysler, New Jersey, and in Detroit, my role at the time was ordering pizza, and I did it happily. About 4 weeks ago, we had an audit. We had a surveillance audit for our ISO 13485 certification, which is a long way of saying some dude showed up at our office and said, I want to look at all your quality systems, and it's a 3-day process, kind of painful. We were getting ready for that. Our quality leader had to go into surgery, and so I and the team spent about 3 full days, about 3 16, 18-hour days, going through and literally just combing through documents to make sure all the signatures are there, the numbers, the files matched, etc., to get ready for the audit. It was not beneath anybody to do stuff like that, because that's the thing that you have to do. Don't let that stop you, right? Your mission and your team. And then lastly, Profusa. It's my current journey, it's my next journey. We're fortunate to have actually made some progress. Before Profusa, as Emily had mentioned, from McKinsey, I joined some large companies and I found some success, personal and professional success in large companies. I ran a $800 million business unit for Life Technologies. So it's a big publicly traded tools company with brands like Invitrogen, Applied Biosystems, Ion Torrent, all in the biology space. $800 million revenue business, about 3,000 employees, pretty big business. And then you kind of, once that was over, we got bought by Danaher for about by Thermo Fisher for about $13 billion. The question to myself was, what next? And I would encourage all of you, young, old, anywhere in the middle, to actually ask yourself that, right? If you're here, what's next? And whether you have the courage to do something to change the world. Now, change the world is a big cliche. Listen, nobody should have an ambition here to say, I'm going to solve, create world peace, right? I mean, if you could do it, please do, because it's important and likely will be really lucrative. But it's not that. It's change the world in the way you define it, right? I choose to change the world in my way, to change how healthcare is actually delivered and create the opportunity to realize digital health and telemedicine in a way that's never been done before. What is the way you choose to change your world in whatever endeavor that you would like to do? And my encouragement there is this, right? You kind of have one shot at this. You have multiple shots on goal in terms of businesses. That's not what I mean. I mean, you have one shot at this as in terms of your professional career. And I have a beautiful wife. Well, at least I think she's beautiful. I have 3 awesome kids, 8, 7, and 2.5. There's nothing I like to do better than to spend time with them. So if I'm going to spend my time away from them, it better be damn well worth my time. So pick something that's going to be worth your time. Pick something that ultimately is going to help you decide how you're going to spend your productive years and give back to the community in a positive way. Because it's never too late, I think, to ask yourself the question, even at a very young age, what is going to be your legacy? Entrepreneurialism, starting company and starting venture, is a great way to define that and create something that's lasting, create something that impacts lives, create something that's going to outlive you and outlive your children. And having the opportunity to do that, I think is such a privilege that I would encourage all of you to not waste it. Did I go over? I don't know. Good. With that, thank you. I'm around.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hwang, for your really, really good talk. But next, I'd like to introduce your next speaker, Kelly Keenan-Trumpbour. So Kelly Keenan-Trumpbour is an angel investor, producer, and a member of the Baltimore Angels. Kelly is the founder of C. Jane Invest, a group of women who invest in woman-founded or co-founded startups. In her work as a producer, she helps women filmmakers and production companies. Kelly earned her JD from the University of Maryland and her MBA from the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. So please extend a warm welcome to Kelly Keenan-Trumpbour.
Access and representation. They are two very strong guiding principles that have been a part of my life and that I hope are part of the lives of the founders I wind up supporting. When I talk about access, this is, can you actually get at something? And usually that something is pretty important, like power or money or influence or the language around any of those. And when you're talking about representation, it's, do you show up to the privilege of the access that you have? Do you use it? When you have representation, you have a chance to claim it, and you have a chance to show up to it. My name's Kelly Keenan-Trumpbour. I am an angel investor, venture capitalist, and producer, and I have a portfolio company called C. Jane Invest. It is just my company, and I have invested exclusively in female-founded companies. The driving mission behind C. Jane Invest is about increasing access and representation for women in the startup world. I am a female investor, and I represent only about 20% of women who are active as angels and venture capitalists. And it's roughly the same percentage for women who are early stage startup founders. My portfolio company backs high growth, early stage founders. They are female founded companies. CJ Invest at this time has 10 companies. The collective valuation of the companies in my portfolio is around $25 million, and I've been honored to have any part of that success, no matter how small, where I've been able to help them. It just means the world to me. So how did I get started with any of this? Again, going right back to access and representation, these were things that meant a lot to me. And it started when I wanted to know the language. I had a dad who was an executive with a Fortune 500 company, and growing up in the 80s and 90s when we would have dinner parties at my house, I'm not sure what your homes would be like, but a very natural segregation would happen where the wives kind of went into the kitchen, and they were all very smart and talented and doing really cool things, and all the men would wind up in the family room. And I was an only child. I was encouraged to be a part of all sorts of conversations. And I could go and I could listen to what the women were talking about and mostly follow along at a young age. You know, usually it's centered around my world, you know, how I was doing in school, how other kids were doing in school, and other interesting things like their jobs and things that they're working at. But when I would go into the room that included my dad and his colleagues, there was a different kind of language going on, and it was kind of frustrating because I couldn't always understand it, and I liked understanding things. You know, I'd learn when I'd reflect back on it that really there was a lot of bravado going on, but you know, there was a whole bunch of like, yeah, well, I really nailed those numbers, and you know, that forecast, I really think that's not gonna happen. And if we're really gonna get this over the ledge, we gotta push this. And I'm like, push what numbers? Wait, I don't understand. And I really kind of thought, like, if I'm supposed to be able to walk into this room, if I'm a smart kid, why is this hard? This shouldn't be so hard. So in something that kind of makes me laugh now, because one of the things I always tell my female founders when they come to me for advice is, assume you're already qualified. Assume you don't need a certification. Assume you don't need a degree. Did I take my own advice? No. I went and I got a JD and an MBA because the primary driver I had was I never wanted to be excluded from one of those rooms just because I didn't speak the language. And I kind of just sensed that if you understood law and if you understood the basics of business, you had a leg up somehow. Like you couldn't be told, oh, you know, this is going to just be a little over your head. And the fear factor that might come in just naturally from your own lack of confidence, I could always check in with myself and be like, hey, I have a JD, I have an MBA, I can be in this room. which, again, totally overprepared. But I went to law school knowing that I wanted to do something outside the traditional path of a lawyer. I really wasn't interested in working in a law firm. I wanted to get into lobbying and I wanted to get into politics. And again, this is about access and representation, where the JD and the MBA gave me language where I broke down a barrier and I all of a sudden had access to this very foreign sounding world and all the things that went on with it. Lobbying helped me seize the power behind that access and use it for somebody else's good. In law school, I started out working for special education and juvenile justice cases. A lot of times my clients go back to issues that were affecting women. There were a lot of single mothers. There were a lot of mothers on welfare. There were people where somebody's grandmother, somebody's aunt took the kids in and then they needed to figure out the school situation for them. I had my MBA and I used that knowledge to leverage it for lobbying for the National Association of Women Business Owners. And this was really about getting access for other women, other minorities, to funds and information that would help their business. So in the 90s, the Clinton administration had done a study to see how much federal money was actually going to women-owned and minority-owned businesses. They funded the study, they did the study, they never released the results of the study, which suggests the results weren't so good. So I spent my time trying to get those results uncovered. And along the way, I met some very cool people. I met the Women Under 40 Political Action Committee. It was a nonpartisan group that brought people into politics who were women of either party. It didn't matter. We just wanted the representation because at the time, the percentage of women who were active in Congress was so small. And if you think of the issues that can impact women in this country under the age of 40, to think that only a handful of people would represent their gender and their age on the floor where the bills are being debated was kind of astonishing. But as we were trying to recruit these people to be in Wolfpack, we realized, hey, there aren't a lot of people stepping up to the plate to actually become politicians. So we started a group that actually trained high school and college women to run for office. So I had the privilege in the beginning of my career to share what access I had to the legislature, to knowledge bases of law and business, with people who are trying to get more information, more funding, and even the support systems, because that's another thing about access and representation. If you have it on your own, that's fine, but usually you need a community or a group that's supporting you, mentoring you to take you to the next level. So everything was going great in my world, but there was one place where access and representation was denied to me, and it had nothing to do with being discriminated against or not having any abilities. It was just random bad luck and biology. My husband and I wanted to show up to being parents. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for us. And I had to go to IVF. I wound up medically having a very rare reaction to some treatments. And I got very sick, very ill. And I had to quit my job. Now, I don't know about all of you in this room, but I consider myself a working breed. And if you tell me I have to sit down and watch daytime television and get better, I will chew on the furniture. I hate it. But I had to quit my job. I had to get healthy. And it was very frustrating because I had just cut off my access to my talents and to the professional world I loved. But I had to really just take a minute and say, okay, what can I claim here? What access do I still have? What privilege do I still have? And what can I do about that? And what I had, which frustrated me, because if all I could do to make myself a parent was write a check, if it could be as crass as that, my world would have been great. You know, it would have just been wonderful. But that wasn't going to do anybody any good. But I realized there were these people, these women who were creating businesses where me writing a check meant the world. It was the difference between their idea stagnating and a door opening for them. It was the difference between them being shut out of a room and them having representation in a room. And one of my friends, Jess Gartner, who is here in Baltimore and is the CEO of Alaview, happened to be starting a company. I was talking to her about it, and I wanted to help her, but I didn't want to work for her. And I said, how do I help? And she said, well, I need an investor. I'm trying to get lots of investors. Can you invest? Strange question, and one that I had never really thought about. And that alarmed me, because here I was, this highly educated MBA, JD. I had been in Washington, D.C., all this fancy stuff. And I couldn't answer the basic question, can I invest? I mean, first there was by invest, do you mean my money and that it could go away and I would never see it again invest? Can I do that? Should I do that? The next question was, no, seriously, this accredited investor thing. The first question people ask me when they say, I like what you do, how can I get involved? After that question comes this question, how hard's the test to become an accredited investor? Did you have to study for it long? There's no test. An accredited investor just is the government's designation about whether someone like me has the financial resources to back your company, take on the risk of losing that money, and not feel significant pain. It came about after the Great Depression because a lot of people lost their shirts and they had no backing. They couldn't have a safety net. The government said, that's it, we're putting a threshold up. If you want to invest in these high-risk ventures, you have to have your own safety net. We're not here to bail you out. So that's all that means. But if I didn't know what it took to get started, and if I hadn't considered all the ways that this could help people, it stunned me to think how many other women might be holding back. They might not be becoming investors, and they might not create startups if they didn't even know how this whole process worked. Jess was doing it, and I really wanted to, help her. And I realized I wasn't going to create a startup. That's not me. That's not what I'm on this planet to do. But I really understood representation. I mean, I had studied it, I had lived it, I did it, I showed up on behalf of other people's causes. And I knew that when people like Jess pitched investors, they walked into a room that was largely full of white men. And that's okay, that doesn't mean that white men don't invest in diverse companies, but it wasn't happening very often. And it was really kind of killing the spirits of the entrepreneurs who were minorities or women. They wanted to go into these rooms and they wanted to see people who might look like them and might be welcoming to them in their way of thinking if there was just even some recognition of like, hey, I'm glad you're here with me. I'm glad you're in the room. Whether or not I invest, it's not just an old boys club. So I took that opportunity and I thought, I have the privilege of being able to write this check. And now if I care anything about these entrepreneurs, I'm going to leverage that entrepreneurial spirit and I'm going to do exactly what they do. I'm going to learn along the way. I'm going to learn along the way as an investor. While they're learning along the way to build their company, I am going to jump in because, I had never done this before. Most of my peers in the investing world come from Wall Street or they're former startup owners and they created their own companies, they cashed out, they knew the process. I was coming at it as a lobbyist, a politician. That's a very different place. But the fundraising cycle that a politician goes through is so similar to what a startup founder goes through. It is a campaign, and it is about the person and the team leading the business. It is a push. It is a whole nother sector of your business. If you don't plan for the fundraising, like someone plans for a presidential campaign, you will leave money on the table, you will drain yourself, and you will feel terrible at the end of it. So here's my essential intent for what CG and Invest was going to become. This was a very satisfying moment for me. I decided I just wanted to back female founders. I had to make sure that they were a high growth, early stage company. And there had to be a mutual opportunity for profit as for me, the investor, and as for them, the entrepreneur. Nobody could be having something over somebody else. That also meant that it would limit some of the companies that I'd get into because there are a lot of fantastic entrepreneurial efforts happening here in Baltimore and everywhere. But if I give money just to any company, if they can't reasonably return that money to me, it doesn't make sense for me. And I had worked in nonprofit. I had worked in charities. I still support them and admire what they do, but that's a different model. I'm not here to give my money to entrepreneurs and say, atta girl, I'm just here to help you out. I actually think it's a greater compliment to say to someone, your idea is so strong, your background and everything you bring to the table is so good, I am holding you to the expectation of returning profit to me. It is kind of a slight to say to someone like that, don't worry, whenever you get around to it, maybe return me some money. I'd like to get it back. A little bit would be nice. It's like, no, you came to this forum. You said you're worth this. You said you wanted this kind of backing. You want me to bet on you. Okay, once I make that bet, we are going to exchange access and representation. I will be your representative inside the angel groups. And I work with the Baltimore Angels, Next Gen Ven, Pipeline Angels. When I care about a deal, I am not unlike a congressional representative or a senator. I am going around lobbying my peers saying, have you heard about this company? This is a great company. You should really check out this company. When I get into a company and I'm ready to invest, I make sure my colleagues and peers know about it. It's the same process as what representatives do when they're trying to get a vote. So I will represent them, and I will also give them access to the network that I have so that when I believe in a company, I'm opening doors wherever I can for them. I'm really trying to get them out in front. In exchange, that company is giving me a kind of access. They're giving me access to the profit that comes from their hard work. Because let's be clear, the person with the harder job in this equation is them. I'm taking on the risk, but the risk was actually a fun thing to let go of it a little bit, because as you've heard today, investing in startups is highly risky, and you should not do it if you can't take the risk. Well, first, I never was going to risk money that I needed to live off of. That was just an easy decision right there. But the next thing was, there are some events in life that just hit this level of meaning where you kind of go, oh, what the hell? And I had known the risk. I got so sick that year. I was in hospitals. We had other family crises going on that involved the well-being of whether people I loved were going to, live or die, injuries that were really threatening. And it, for me, was as easy as saying, I'm sorry, does this involve my future children? Are we talking about limbs? Are we talking about bodies being whole? No, because see, I've lived that risk, and this is just money. And that's a privilege that I get to say that. But it's about growing that money and turning it into something else and bringing life where somebody is saying, my idea just needs this fuel. It needs to go to the next level. So I jumped in, I got started, and I met amazing colleagues and peers along the way. It was a great experience for me just to do exactly that. There was so much that I already knew that I wasn't aware of how quickly it comes. I even catch myself now because I constantly talk to people who are at a much earlier stage. They're not even at the investing stage, needing my capital. And I've adopted the lingo of investors, and I too easily spout off terms that once were strange sounding to me. So I try to remember, hey, this is still a place where there's a lot of information to be had, and it can be dense, but it's also fun. And when I think of my founders and the people who are represented in the CJ and Invest portfolio, I hope that they know that the access that they are giving me to their creativity, to their drive, is such a gift. Of course, I'm grateful for the chance to profit, to grow my portfolio, but they have given me access to a world of such cool ideas. I have investments in organic chicken nuggets. I have investments in wildly cool films about women startup owners. There's just so many great things. It is the business world's art forum, startups. That's what it is to me. And that I get to participate in that. I wouldn't have come up with those ideas. So I get to find out about what else is happening in the business world. That gives me a richer knowledge base on top of all, the numbers that I run that show, yeah, hey, I'm heading in a great direction with this portfolio. And in exchange, I hope I am giving my founders a look at what happens when you have confidence to step up and claim the access you have and say, I'm holding this door open for you. Because when companies pitch, I have turned down investment opportunities because I don't see a woman in the C-suite. I don't see a female founder. That's just my objective. There are lots of ways that people invest, and there are lots of groups that are underrepresented in the startup community. But I hold the door open for women, and I hold the door open for women because I think their ideas are cool and fascinating, and business is a branch of the marketplace that informs politics. So don't kid yourself. If you become the next Bill Gates, you will get phone calls from presidential nominees. You will be asked to comment on major policies that affect our world. Your company and the template it sets for workplace culture, how you treat employees, the products that you put out, the sustainability of those products, you will leave something that people will study and model. So I really feel like I just kind of hopped over a little bit, and in a weird way, I'm still influencing the political world. I just moved into the business side. So for any of you who are interested, please go check out my Facebook page on it's CJ and Invest Facebook page. If you'd like to follow along there, I'll have some more information coming out, and that's where I post a lot of the newest stuff. But congratulations to TCO, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their conference.
First off, I want to say a great thank you to Kelly for coming out and speaking, and absolutely all of our speakers and the startups who joined us today, and especially to the audience, especially those of you who stuck around for the entire conference. I know it was a long one. I also want to thank our sponsors, whom without their support, this event would have been impossible. And so bear with me, it's a good list, but I really want to make sure that they get the recognition that they deserve, because without them, we wouldn't have been able to do this event, and we wouldn't have been able to bring together all of these great startups, speakers, nonprofits, and of course, students and community members. So a big thank you to Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures, the Johns Hopkins Office of Student Life, the Johns Hopkins University Career Center, the Johns Hopkins University Alumni Association, Compass Cybersecurity, Smart Logic, Open Range Video, who has set up this lovely live stream and all of the video production services, the Spark Co-working Center, Five and Dime, Contrary Capital, and Startup Maryland, who brought their fantastic tour bus to us today, and to all of the startups who took their time to come out and help make this event great. We do have the raffle where we will be reading off some numbers, and we're raffling off Amazon gift certificates, t-shirts, whatnot. But before we get to that, I just want to give a note on why we do what we do. So at TCO Labs, we're all about fostering entrepreneurship, but specifically at the undergraduate level, because we recognize that there are students who don't quite fit in with the molds that a lot of times are expected of us. So there are people who don't want to just go straight into finance, or don't just want to go get a consulting job, or go become a doctor after university. And a lot of times, they don't necessarily understand that entrepreneurship is a viable career path. But I hope that through the speakers you saw today and the startups you met, that if you are a student who has that entrepreneurial edge in you, that you should pursue it, because it is viable, and you can actually go out there and create brilliant things that never existed before and make a gigantic change in this world. So if we even convinced one student today to pursue their entrepreneurial venture instead of just go straight into that job they had planned, or continued studying something that they weren't passionate about, we've done our job. So again, a sincere thank you to every single one of you who is here today, who stayed throughout the entirety of the conference, and to especially to the Garay family, who made those wonderful cake pops upstairs that I hope you all enjoyed, and everyone else who was involved. But perhaps the biggest thanks is to our TCO team members. Can you guys please stand up? Yeah, I want to give a round of applause. So we still have a long, long way to go in making Johns Hopkins a hub for undergraduate entrepreneurship, but we do have the talented students, and we have the drive behind it, and so it's just a little bit of legwork, and it's brilliant students like yourselves coming out to events like these that really will help create an ecosystem. So before I read off the raffle tickets, my final call to action is, if you're a student who just wants to get involved in entrepreneurship. You don't need an idea, you don't need to really know what you want to do, but if you want to be involved, reach out to one of the team members. We will find a way for you to get involved, whether it be interning with a startup, whether it be incubating your own idea, or just getting you out there to meet cool people and cool organizations. If you are a startup who needs student interns, reach out to us. We will help you find the talent here at Johns Hopkins that is so abundant. If you're a community organization, the same goes for you. We have talented students who do want to get involved. Or if you're an alumni or just a community member that wants to give back to your school or just give back to young student entrepreneurs, get in contact with us and we'll find a way that we can put your effort towards helping the next generation of young entrepreneurs. So without further ado, I'm going to read off a few raffle ticket numbers. If this is the number on your tickets, you guys have many in your bag, shoot me an email, and that's pava@tcolabs.org, and we will send you the gift certificates. They're all virtual. Try to reduce the waste for this event. So the first number is 548-1556. So 548-1556. Next is 548-1505. 548-1505. 548-1364. 548-1364. 548-1328. 548-1328. All right, if any of those are your numbers, shoot us an email, and if not, we'll have the prizes distributed to other people who are still in attendance. We'll figure that out. So I guess a final thank you to everyone who helped organize, everyone who came out today to support the ecosystem, everyone who joined us virtually, and everyone who decided to just give a little bit of their time and attention to entrepreneurship, because we really can make a gigantic change, not only at Hopkins, not only in Baltimore, but in the world around us by fostering the young entrepreneurial talent that we have here. So, thank you.